Yields in Africa today are about 25% of the global average. And so there's a program that we're launching, which is called Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. We're going to spend about roughly $800 million on that. It will bring the international agricultural research centers together. It will bring the national agricultural research systems, the farmers, the civil society, and the private sector together to take a lot of technologies that we have sitting on the shelf and to take them to scale, whether it's for rice, whether it's for cassava, whether it's for maize, whether it's for soybean and dairy and other fishery products. Africa has the technologies to feed itself. But you can't feed yourself if those technologies are not in the hands of farmers. So that's why we are going to be doing that. The second area we're going to be investing in is on infrastructure. Obviously, to support countries to have good commodity exchanges, to have rural roads, to have investment in irrigation facilities, and also to address rural energy, because without rural energy, you will lose most of what you produce anyway. We lose most of what we produce because we can't store and we can't process a lot of that. We are also going to be working on financing. Now, for financing, I'm particularly excited because you take a look at it today. Less than 3% of all the total bank financing in Africa goes to the agricultural sector. Yet the sector accounts for about maybe 36%, 34 to 36%, depending on which countries you look at, of the GDP. And so we've got to de-risk the financial markets to be able to lend more to the agricultural sector.
One of the things that has come over and over in these reports is that women have been left out. And so unless there is the bridging of the gender equality gap, the continent will not be able to feed itself.
You can't get agriculture going unless you raise the productivity of these women farmers. So at the bank, at the African Development Bank, we've launched a major effort to empower women, not just in agriculture, but empower women generally in Africa. We've launched what we call the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, or a program we call AFAWA. And we're using AFAWA to leverage $3 billion US dollars specifically for women entrepreneurs, women farmers. And so the goal here is get the financial markets to understand that women pay back their loans. Over 97% of them pay back their loans. And maybe the remaining 3% that don't pay back, maybe it's their husbands that stop them on their way to going to pay it. So women are bankable.
How about the demographic dividend, the youth? Are you working with African governments to win the youth over from the competition that you have from radicalized groups, Boko Haram on one side, Al-Shabaab on the other, and you trying to sell agriculture to the youth as one of the ways of creating employment?
Agriculture is a business, and that if you support the young people, they can succeed very well in agriculture. And that's why the bank has launched a major effort called Jobs for Africa's Youth. But that Jobs for Africa's Youth is targeted on not just agriculture. We're targeting how are we going to build the skills of our youth? How are we going to develop their entrepreneurship capacity? How do we support them to have business incubation facilities that can make their businesses succeed? And also, how do we give them, badly needed long-term finance to grow their businesses? Because if you go to banks and you're a 21-year-old person, they probably ask you for your tax returns for the last 40 years. Well, you were not born in 40 years ago. And so we have to create an enabling environment for young people. So this initiative of the African Development Bank called Jobs for Africa's Youth, we are going to help to stimulate the creation of 25 million jobs over 10 years and impact 50 million African youth. Why is this very important? We have to do it urgently. Look, the future of Africa's youth does not lie at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea.
The last 2 years actually have been very tough for Africa with the slowdown of the economy in China. Would you say that the narrative of Africa rising is over?
The global economy is growing today, slowed down tremendously. The global average growth rate is 3.2%. Africa is growing at average of 3.5, 3.6%. And we project that Africa by next year will probably grow about 4.2%. So Africa is doing well in tough situation. That tough situation is not unique to Africa. You have it in China, you have it in Japan, you have it in Europe, and all of that. So it's not unique to us, but Africa is doing well despite that. So the point really is that African economies are resilient. Look, there are countries such as Kenya, You take Democratic Republic of Congo, you take Mozambique, you take Rwanda, you take Ethiopia, and you take Cote d'Ivoire. Now, all these countries are growing at about 7%, which is fantastic. If we go well about over 10 countries that are growing at well over 6 or 7% in Africa, even right now. We've got another 15 countries that are growing at about 3 to 5%. So Africa is not one country. It's highly heterogeneous. And so people can't just take one swipe and say, well, all of Africa. No, that's not what is happening. There are pockets of growth. And what makes those countries to grow is very strong macroeconomic policy. They have very good fiscal stabilization programs. And they are also investing in their real sectors.
That's the African Development Bank president there speaking to our Sarah Kimani in Nairobi. Well, let's take a look to see how the African